I don't usually sit in coffee shops this long. Normally, I'd just grab something quick on my way to campus, maybe scroll through my phone, then head out. But lately, I've been staying, pretending I'm studying or that I have someone waiting for me. That's where I first started noticing her. She wasn't loud about it, never the type to walk in and make people turn their heads. But I did. Every time. She'd come in with her hair tied back in this loose, almost careless way, like she'd just left a sink full of dishes to run out for coffee. My friend's mom. We weren't supposed to overlap here. She had her own world. But on mornings when I had a late class, I'd see her at the counter, asking for the same thing every time. A black coffee, 1 sugar. No milk. She said it like she was too tired to complicate it. The first time she remembered my order, I froze. Americano, no room, right? She said, glancing over her shoulder at me while the barista filled her cup. I laughed, but it came out awkward, thin. Yeah, you've got a better memory than me. She gave this little half smile, nothing showy. Just lips pressing together like she wasn't sure she should be smiling at me at all. That's when it started. Noticing became a habit. The way she tucked her hands into her coat sleeves while waiting for her drink. How she lingered at the sugar station, tearing open packets one by one even when I knew she only used one. She didn't rush to leave, even if she pretended she was in a hurry. I'd catch myself folding napkins while she was around, smoothing the creases until the paper went soft. It gave my hands something to do when I didn't know where else to look. I wasn't lonely in the obvious sense. I had people, friends, a phone full of group chats I barely opened anymore. But there were pauses, drafted messages I never sent. My finger hovering over a name in my contacts just long enough to realize calling them would feel heavier than the silence. That's what she felt like, someone who could sit in the silence without filling it. One morning, it rained harder than anyone expected. The cafe smelled like wet coats and coffee grounds. She walked in shaking out her umbrella, strands of hair stuck damp against her cheek. She caught me staring before I could look away. "Guess we're both trapped," she said, gesturing at the downpour outside. "Yeah," I muttered, eyes flicking to her hands. She was rubbing them together for warmth, knuckles pale from the cold. She sat across from me without asking. Not close, but not far enough to pretend it didn't mean something. We talked about nothing. The rain, the way this city always seems surprised by whether it should be used to by now. I kept circling back to her laugh, low and quiet, like she didn't want to draw attention to herself. When the rain let up, she stood, adjusted her bag strap, smoothed her sleeve. "See you around," she said. I nodded, pretending I wasn't watching her leave, pretending it didn't matter. But that night, while I sat on my bed with my phone in hand, I saw her name light up on the screen. A message, simple as anything, but enough to make my chest feel like it had forgotten how to move. "This stays between us, okay?" Her message stayed on my screen longer than I'd admit. 3 words. "This stays between us." No explanation. No follow-up. Just a line that somehow made my chest feel tight and light all at once. I typed replies, deleted them, typed again. Ended up with nothing but the read receipt glowing back at me. The next time I saw her was at the grocery store, of all places. Fluorescent lights, carts with one bad wheel, the sound of someone's kid whining 2 aisles over. She was staring at the shelf of tea boxes like they were decisions that actually mattered. "You're a coffee person," I said before I could stop myself. She turned, caught off guard, then smiled. "And you know this how? You've never ordered tea?" I shrugged. "Not once." She looked back at the shelves, picked up a box, turned it over. "Maybe I'm allowed to surprise people sometimes." Her tone was casual, but her eyes lingered on mine a little too long before she dropped the box in her cart. We ended up walking the aisles together. She picked up pasta. I grabbed cereal I didn't need. It was easier to just keep moving beside her, as if we had come there together. Like it wasn't strange. Like I wasn't aware of who she was. At checkout, she asked, "You walking back?" "Yeah. Help me carry these, then." I bought too much. So I did. And that's how I ended up in her kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator louder than either of us talking. She unpacked groceries. I leaned on the counter, not sure if I should offer to help or just stay out of the way. "Divorced 6 years," she said suddenly, without looking at me. She was pulling apples out of a bag, setting them in a bowl. "I still buy too much food. Old habit." I wasn't sure what to say. I just nodded. My hands were folded tight in front of me, pressing knuckles against knuckles. She laughed softly, more at herself than anything. That's not something I usually announce to people. Guess I'm not people, I said, quieter than I meant to. Her hand stilled, just for a second. Then she went back to arranging the apples. The silence stretched. Not heavy, but close. Like something was in the room with us that neither of us wanted to name. We sat at her small kitchen table after that. She made tea, though I could tell she didn't really care for it. Pushed a mug toward me anyway. I watched the steam curl between us. Watched how her hands wrapped around the cup like she needed the warmth more than the taste. We talked about small things. My classes. Her work. The neighborhood. All words that didn't matter. Except they gave me permission to watch the way her mouth curved around them. And underneath it all was the truth neither of us said out loud. She was my friend's mom. Twice my age. Someone I should have looked at with nothing more than respect. But respect has its cracks. When she laughed at something dumb I said, really laughed, tilting her head back, letting herself go for that half second. It felt like the room tilted with her. Like I was suddenly too aware of how close our chairs were, the faint brush of her knee against mine under the table. I looked away, gripping my mug too tight. She noticed. I know she did, because she went quiet, watching me over the rim of her cup. I imagined reaching across the table, touching her hand. I imagined what she'd do, pull away, or let it stay. The thought itself felt dangerous enough that I didn't move at all. Instead, when I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. Her hand touched my arm lightly, guiding me out. A casual gesture, nothing anyone else would have noticed. But I felt it for hours afterward. And I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The next time it happened, it wasn't planned. I was passing her apartment when the door cracked open. She stepped out, holding a stack of books against her chest. One slipped, thudding to the floor. Here, I said, bending down before she could. Our hands touched on the cover. Just a brush, but it jolted more than it should have. She pulled back a second too quickly, eyes flicking to mine, then away. Thanks, she murmured. Her voice was softer than usual, like it didn't want to carry into the hallway. She hesitated, then pushed the door open wider. Come in for a minute. Just, if you're not busy. Inside, her living room was dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon glare. Books stacked in uneven towers. A half-finished cup of tea on the coffee table. I sat on the edge of the couch. She hovered near the armchair, undecided. We weren't talking much. Just filling the air with little things. How classes were going. How she hated the upstairs neighbor's music. Words like pebbles, dropped one by one, barely making ripples. Then silence. Too much of it. She folded her arms, then unfolded them, resting her hands in her lap instead. Fingers fidgeting. She looked like she wanted to say something. Stopped. Tried again. You shouldn't spend so much time here, she finally whispered. The words hit harder than I expected. I nodded, staring at the pattern in her rug. Yeah, you're probably right. But I didn't move. Neither did she. The air felt sharp, like it could break. My chest was tight with all the things I didn't say. I don't care. I want to be here. I don't want to leave. A sound broke it, the hallway door slamming shut. Voices outside. My friend's laugh, muffled but unmistakable. We both froze. She straightened in her chair, tucking hair behind her ear with quick, nervous fingers. I swallowed, pulse jumping. Maybe you should, she started. Yeah. My voice cracked. I stood, but too slowly. She moved closer to walk me out, and for a second, we stopped near the door. Too close. Her hand brushed my sleeve, light as static. I looked at her. She looked back. Neither of us breathed. It would have taken nothing. Just leaning forward, just closing the inch of space. My hand almost lifted, almost reached for hers. Almost. The voices outside grew louder, feet on the stairs. My friend was getting closer. She stepped back fast, almost stumbled. Go, she whispered. So I did. But the ghost of her hand on my arm followed me down the stairs, louder than anything my friend said that night, that IT was late, later than I usually walked home. The street was mostly empty, shop lights fading one by one. She was outside her building, sitting on the low stone ledge with her arms wrapped around herself, like she'd been waiting but didn't want to admit it. You're out late, I said, surprising both of us. She startled, then smiled faintly. Could say the same. I should have kept walking. Should have waved and gone upstairs. Instead, I stopped. She shifted over, leaving space beside her, and I sat down. The night air was cool, carrying that faint smell of rain left over from the afternoon. We watched a couple pass by on the opposite sidewalk, hand in hand, their conversation just a blur of sound. Funny, she said after a long pause. I used to hate this city at night. Felt too empty. And now, she hesitated. Now it feels too full. I didn't ask what she meant, though the silence that followed said enough. Full of what? Of who? Of us. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. She kept her hands clasped in her lap, knuckles pale, thumb worrying at a nail. She looked like she was holding something in her throat, something heavy. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Yeah. Why do you keep coming back? I stared at the ground, at the cracks in the pavement, at the way a cigarette but had lodged itself between them. My mouth opened, then closed. I don't know, I said, though the words weren't true. She let out a breath, sharp, like she'd been holding it. You should know better. You do know better. Her voice cracked there, softer at the end. I glanced at her. Her eyes were shining, not with tears exactly, but with something close. Something held back. I wanted to tell her the truth. That I noticed everything about her. Her tired laugh, the way she always hesitated before unlocking her door, how she lingered in places like she wanted someone to keep her there. That I noticed her noticing me. Instead I said, it's not just me, is it? Her head turned sharply. You're here too, I added, voice low. Sitting out here at midnight, waiting for, I don't even know what. The silence stretched. A car rolled by, headlights sweeping across us before vanishing. I can't, she whispered, then stopped, shaking her head. He's your friend. I know, I cut in. Too quickly. My hands had tightened into fists without me realizing. I forced them open. The anger wasn't at her. It was at the way the world kept telling me I shouldn't want this, shouldn't even think about it. I'm not a kid, I said. That made her look at me, really look. Like she was measuring the truth of it against everything else. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The distance between us felt electric. Not loud, not explosive, just a charge humming under the skin, waiting. I shouldn't, she started, but her voice faltered again. She pressed a hand to her forehead, rubbed at her temple. God, I shouldn't even be sitting here with you. But she was. I almost reached out, almost placed my hand over hers where it twisted restlessly in her lap. Almost leaned closer, drawn by the heat of her presence in the cool night. Her breath caught when I shifted, like she thought I might. And maybe I would have. But then she asked, barely above a whisper, eyes fixed on mine, what do you think happens if we don't stop? After that night on the ledge, something shifted. I waited for her to text, to say something, anything. But days went by without a word. When I saw her in passing, at the cafe, at the mailbox, her eyes slid past me like I was just another face. Not cold exactly. Not cruel. Just distant. It felt rehearsed, like she'd decided on a part to play. I tried to act normal. I went out with friends, showed up to class, kept my phone face down on the desk so I wouldn't keep checking it. But silence has a weight to it. Every time I didn't hear from her, the weight pressed harder. One night, restless, I walked past her apartment. The curtains were drawn, lights glowing faintly inside. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to decide if I should knock. My hand hovered near the door, and then I heard a man's voice. Not loud, just muffled through the walls. Deep enough to freeze me where I stood. I didn't move for a full minute, pulse in my throat, before finally walking away. The next morning, at the coffee shop, she was already there. Hair neat, coat buttoned, her usual black coffee steaming on the counter. She caught sight of me, and for the first time in weeks, her gaze held. Just a flicker. Then she smiled politely, like I was a neighbor she barely knew. Morning, she said. Nothing more. I nodded, throat too dry for words. We ended up waiting for our drinks side by side. My hand tapped against the counter. Hers stayed perfectly still. You don't usually come this early, I finally said. She stirred her coffee, eyes on the swirl. Schedules change. That was it. No explanation. No mention of the man's voice. No acknowledgement of the nights we'd spent orbiting closer and closer to something we couldn't name. I wanted to ask her why. Wanted to remind her that she'd been the one to open the door, the one to send this stays between us. But the words stayed stuck. The rest of the day blurred. I kept replaying that flicker of a smile, the deliberate distance in her voice. It wasn't rejection, not exactly. It felt more like erasure. Like she'd drawn a line through me in her story and kept going. That night, I sat on my bed staring at my phone. Drafted a dozen messages. What changed? Did I do something? Who was at your place? None of them got sent. The cursor blinked in the empty text box. The silence on the screen matched the silence in the room. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The next morning, I went to the cafe again. Same seat, same coffee. The door opened at the same time it always had, and for a split second I braced to see her step in. But the seat across from me stayed emptied. It didn't happen in some planned, perfect way. It was just late again, and I was walking home when I saw her outside, fumbling with her keys at the building door. She looked tired. Not just end of the day tired, but like she'd been carrying something too long. When she noticed me, her hand froze mid-turn. The key stayed stuck in the lock. For a second, I thought she might just walk inside and close the door. But instead, she exhaled, stepped back. "You're out late again," she said, like it was the only safe line left between us. "Yeah," I swallowed, searching for words that didn't feel rehearsed. "You've been different." She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. I thought it would be easier. Pretending. Stepping back. I shifted, hands jammed in my pockets. "It's not." Her laugh was small, brittle. "No, it's not." We stood there in the yellow glow of the hallway light, the building quiet around us. Every unspoken thing between us seemed to settle into the space, too heavy to ignore anymore. "I heard someone at your place," I blurted. Immediate regret followed, but it was out. Her gaze flicked up, sharp for a second. Then it softened. "My ex dropped something off for our son." "Our son." The words pressed down harder than I expected. "My friend. His mom." She leaned against the wall, rubbing her hand across her face. "This, whatever this is, it's not supposed to exist. You know that, right?" "Yeah," I said. My voice was rougher than I meant. "But it does." The silence stretched again, long enough for my pulse to settle into my ears. She dropped her hand and looked straight at me. "You make me feel seen. And I don't know if that's fair to you." I wanted to say a dozen things. "I don't care. I want this. I don't need fair." Instead, all that came out was, "You see me too." Her lips parted. She took half a step forward, stopped, then tried again. Close enough now that I could smell the faint trace of her tea on her breath. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "Yeah." We stood there, caught between the world outside the door and the one we weren't supposed to step into. Her hand lifted slightly, like she was reaching for me, then hesitated in the air. I didn't move either. Both of us suspended in the same fragile decision. Finally, she let her palm rest lightly against my sleeve. Not a grip, not even a real hold, just contact. Barely there, but real enough to make my chest ache. Her eyes searched mine, tired and raw. "What do we do now?" I didn't have an answer. Not one that would solve anything. Not one that could change who we were to each other. But I didn't pull away. I let the quiet carry us. And in that quiet, she gave the smallest, most fragile smile. "Okay," she said softly. And that was all. It didn't happen all at once. There was no grand decision, no sudden crossing of a line. Just days that kept going, slowly rearranging themselves around us. At first, we kept our distance again. A week, then two. I half expected that night in the hallway to be the last note, the unfinished sentence. But then one morning, 8:47 a.m., the exact time the cafe opened, I walked in and found her already there, sitting by the window with a black coffee in front of her. She glanced up, and this time she didn't look away, just tapped the seat across from her. An invitation so simple it barely counted as one. From there, it was small steps. Quiet ones. I carried her groceries more often, and she stopped pretending it was an inconvenience. We sat together on the stone ledge outside her building some nights, not always talking. Sometimes we just let the silence fill itself, the way it always seemed to between us. She made tea for me again, though she wrinkled her nose every time she sipped her own. "Still can't stand it," she'd mutter, but she never stopped brewing it. A ritual more than a taste. The tension that had once threatened to crack everything softened into something steadier. Not simple, not perfect, but real. She told me about the divorce in more detail one night, her voice flat, but her eyes full. I told her about the draft texts I never sent, the friends I never called, the loneliness I didn't know how to admit to anyone else. She listened the way no one else had. And when I caught her watching me in return, I realized she trusted me enough to let me see the pieces of her she kept hidden. We never made declarations. No, "I love you." No promises written in stone. Just choices, repeated in small ways, until they became our rhythm. Her son, my friend, never asked. Maybe he didn't notice, or maybe he did and chose not to see. The world around us stayed busy, messy, ordinary. But within it, we carved out something of our own. One night, months later, we found ourselves back at the park bench where we'd once sat in near confession. The air was cool, the street quiet except for the occasional car passing. She shifted closer, our shoulders brushing. Strange, she murmured. How something so wrong can start to feel normal. I looked at her, at the faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Not wrong, I said. Just ours. She laughed softly at that, shaking her head. But she didn't disagree. We sat there until the street lights flickered off, until the sky lightened with morning. At some point, her hand slipped into mine. No hesitation this time. No ghosts of what might happen if someone saw. Just her hand, warm and steady. Life didn't transform overnight. She still bought too much food sometimes. I still folded napkins when I didn't know what to say. But the silences we shared no longer felt dangerous. They felt lived in. And I think that's what stayed with me most. Not the first message, not the pauses that almost broke us, but the way she finally smiled, slow and quiet, like she knew the sentence had finally been finished. Something only we would understand.